The courtroom was filled with quiet snickers. Alice Montgomery, dressed in a simple beige suit, looked like a mouse in a den of lions. Her billionaire ex-husband, Richard, smirked as his lawyer tore her apart, painting her as a simple-minded socialite who deserved nothing. He called her artistically inclined, but commercially irrelevant. The gallery laughed, but Alice held a secret, one built of steel and stone. The laughter stopped, and the entire room fell into stunned silence when her lawyer asked one simple question. "Mr. Davenport, do you know who owns this building?" The air in courtroom 3B of the Manhattan Justice Tower was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and quiet, predatory ambition. It was a room designed to intimidate, with dark mahogany panels that rose 30 feet to a coffered ceiling and heavy brass fixtures that seemed to absorb all light. For Alice Montgomery, it felt less like a hall of justice and more like a sacrificial altar. She sat beside her lawyer, Sarah Jenkins, at a table that felt too small. Alice herself seemed small. In her mid-40s, she wore a beige wool suit of impeccable quality, but zero flash. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a simple knot, and her face, pale and unadorned, save for a touch of lipstick, was a mask of placid neutrality. She looked like a provincial librarian who had wandered into a hostile corporate takeover. Across the aisle, in stark contrast, was Richard Davenport. Richard didn't just occupy his chair, he conquered it. His suit was a bespoke charcoal masterpiece from Savile Row. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, and his smile was a weapon. He was the CEO of Davenport Capital, a man who ate Risk for breakfast and fired people for sport. He leaned over to his own lawyer, the infamous Marcus Thorne, and whispered something. Both men chuckled, casting a dismissive glance at Alice. Thorne was a shark in a $10,000 suit, a senior partner at Sullivan and Cromwell, the kind of lawyer who didn't just argue a case, he brutalized the opposition. He rose, a mountain of smug confidence. "Your Honor," Thorne began, his voice booming with artificial sincerity, "we are here today to dissolve a 20-year marriage. My client, Mr. Richard Davenport, a titan of industry, a man who built a financial empire from scratch." He gestured to Richard, who nodded humbly, as if embarrassed by the praise. Alice had to stop her lips from twitching. Richard hadn't started from scratch. He'd started with her father's $2 million seed investment, a wedding gift that Richard now referred to as a minor startup loan, paid back with interest. Alice knew it had never been paid back. "And his wife, Mrs. Montgomery," Thorne continued, his tone shifting from reverence to mild pity. "A lovely woman, a wonderful hostess, a dedicated patron of the arts. My client has the deepest respect for the life they shared." The word shared was delivered with a subtle, cutting emphasis. In the gallery, a young woman with hair the color of champagne and a diamond on her left hand that could choke a horse watched intently. This was Chloe Vance, Richard's 26-year-old executive assistant turned fiancée. Her presence was a calculated insult, one Alice had learned to ignore. "Mr. Davenport," Thorne said, "is a generous man. Despite Mrs. Montgomery having, shall we say, no direct involvement in the creation of his $500 million fortune, he wants to see her taken care of." Sarah Jenkins, Alice's lawyer, scribbled on a legal pad. Sarah was the opposite of Thorne, young, sharp, and perpetually underestimated. She wore an off-the-rack suit and had a gaze that could pinpoint a lie from 50 paces. "Therefore," Thorne announced, "Mr. Davenport is offering a one-time lump-sum payment of $5 million, a generous parachute to see her comfortably settled." A ripple of murmurs went through the gallery. $5 million. It sounded like a fortune. But Alice knew it was less than the annual bonus Richard paid himself. It was 1% of his declared net worth. It was, in short, an insult. Judge Evelyn Reed, a woman who had seen everything Wall Street divorces had to offer, peered over her glasses. "Miss Jenkins, your response to this generous offer?" Sarah stood. Her voice was clear and lacked Thorne's theatricality. "We reject it, Your Honor." Unequivocally. Thorne scoffed, a theatrical sound of disbelief. "On what grounds?" "My client built the business, Mrs. Montgomery." "Well, she decorated the houses." Richard's new fiancée giggled, covering her mouth quickly. Alice felt a cold, familiar calm settle over her. She remembered 1,000 dinners where Richard had explained his complex world to guests while patting her hand. "Alice handles the beautiful things," he'd say. "I handle the messy business of making money." He had always spoken of her as a beloved, slightly dim pet. "My client's contributions," Sarah said, "were not decorative. They were foundational. We will be proving that Mrs. Montgomery's non-financial contributions allowed Mr. Davenport to build his wealth, and furthermore, that her own financial acumen significantly exceeds his." This time the laugh was louder. Even Richard let out a short, sharp bark. "Her financial acumen?" he whispered to Thorne, loud enough for the court stenographer to hear. "She thinks a portfolio is a leather briefcase." Alice looked at Richard. Her eyes were flat, revealing nothing. She had listened to him mock her little art history degree for 2 decades. She had endured the condescension when she'd ask questions about his work, only to be told, "Don't you worry your pretty head about it, darling. It's all terribly boring." He had no idea what she did when he was at the office. He had no idea what she did on her charity afternoons or her gallery hops. He had no idea that the pretty head he dismissed held a mind that could map complex financial structures in her sleep. He thought she was the mouse. He was about to find out she was the trap. "If that is all," Judge Reed said, her patience already wearing thin, "Mr. Thorne, you may call your first witness." "I call Mr. Richard Davenport to the stand," Thorne beamed. Richard smoothed his suit, shot a confident wink at Chloe, and strode to the witness box, a king taking his throne. Alice watched him, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The first act of the humiliation was about to begin. "Mr. Davenport," Marcus Thorne began, his tone dripping with respect, "could you describe for the court your average workday during your 20-year marriage?" Richard settled into the witness box, the picture of weary yet vital success. It was demanding. "I was at the office before the markets opened, often past midnight. 18-hour days were the norm. When you're building something like Davenport Capital, you don't sleep. You hunt. And while you were hunting, what was Mrs. Montgomery's role in the partnership?" "Alice was a wonderful support," Richard said, the picture of magnanimity. "She managed the household staff, oversaw the children's schedules when they were young, and she planned parties. Wonderful parties, I'll admit. Our annual fundraiser for the museum was always the talk of the town." "So her role was in the domestic and social sphere," Thorne pressed. "Exclusively," Richard said, with a hint of sadness, as if he wished she could have been more. "I tried to involve her in the business, of course, to explain what I did. But she just wasn't interested. Her passions were art, music, charity, all very admirable." Alice felt Sarah's hand briefly touch her arm, a silent, "Stay calm." Alice didn't need the warning. Her pulse was perfectly steady. So at no point did she contribute to the strategy, investments, or financial growth of Davenport Capital. "Good heavens, no," Richard chuckled, as if the idea were absurd. "Alice wouldn't know the difference between a hedge fund and a garden hedge. It's just not how her mind works. Thorne nodded grimly. Thank you, Mr. Davenport. No further questions. He sat down, and Judge Reed looked at Alice's lawyer. Miss Jenkins, you're cross? Not at this time, Your Honour, Sarah said, much to Thorne's surprise. We'll reserve our questions for Mr. Davenport later. I'd like to call Mrs. Alice Montgomery to the stand. A ripple of surprise. Usually, the defendant's counsel would try to dismantle the plaintiff first. Thorne's smile widened. This was a gift. He was going to destroy her. Alice walked to the stand. She took the oath, her voice quiet but clear. Thorne rose for his cross-examination, circling her like a shark. Mrs. Montgomery, thank you for joining us. Now, you heard your husband's testimony. Do you dispute it? Do you claim you were, in fact, an active partner at Davenport Capital? Richard's testimony regarding his hours was correct, Alice said evenly. He worked very hard. That's not what I asked. Did you work at Davenport Capital? No, I did not. What was your official title within the marriage, then? Homemaker, socialite. I was his wife, Alice said. A noble title. And what did your duties as wife entail besides the parties your husband so generously praised? I managed our 3 properties in Manhattan, the Hamptons, and Aspen. I oversaw the budgets for all 3. I managed the domestic staff of 14. I managed the family's social and travel calendars. And I sat on the boards of 3 major city charities, coordinating multi-million-dollar fundraising efforts. Thorne waved a hand dismissively. All very taxing. Budgets for florists and caterers. Tell me, Mrs. Montgomery, what is your educational background? I have a Bachelor of Arts from Vassar College. A B.A. in what? Art history, with a minor in French. Thorne let this hang in the air. Laughter, quickly stifled, came from the gallery. Art history. Lovely. So, while Mr. Davenport was navigating the 2008 financial crisis, you could... What? Tell him about the stylistic differences between Rococo and Baroque? Objection, Sarah Jenkins snapped. Counsel is mocking the witness. Sustained, Judge Reed said, though her lips twitched. Get to a relevant question, Mr. Thorne. Oh, it's very relevant, Your Honour. Mrs. Montgomery's counsel claimed she has financial acumen. I am simply trying to find any basis for this claim. Mrs. Montgomery, can you explain to the court, in simple terms, the principle of a leveraged buyout? This was the killing blow, a complex financial term. Alice paused. She opened her mouth. It's a transaction in which a simple yes or no will suffice, Mrs. Montgomery. Can you or can you not explain it as your husband could? Richard's business was not leveraged buyouts, Alice said calmly. He's a growth equity investor. Thorne was taken aback by the specific term, but recovered quickly. She's been coached, he said to the judge, who shot him a warning glare. My point is, you have no formal business training. You have never held a job in finance. You have never, in 20 years, earned a single paycheck. Is that correct? Alice met his gaze. I have never earned a paycheck. No. And yet you stand here today, rejecting a $5 million gift, demanding half of an empire you did nothing to build. You demand 50% for 0% of the work. Is that the sum of it? I am asking for what is equitable, Alice said. Equitable, Thorne scoffed. He turned to the judge. Your Honour, the witness has, by her own admission, no financial training and no involvement in the business. She has spent the last 20 years spending her husband's money on art and parties. This claim that she is some sort of hidden financial genius is, frankly, an insult to the court. We are wasting our time. He strutted back to his table, sitting down to a congratulatory pat on the back from Richard. Richard looked at Alice and mouthed the words, You should have taken the deal." Alice just watched him. She felt the eyes of the entire courtroom on her. They saw a fool, a greedy, grasping, foolish woman who had been put in her place. "Miss Jenkins?" the judge said, a note of exhaustion in her voice. "Do you have anything for your witness?" "No, Your Honor," Sarah said, standing up. "Mrs. Montgomery may step down." As Alice walked back to her seat, a man in the gallery, a reporter for a financial gossip column, snickered. She just got steamrolled. Alice sat down. She took a sip of water. She felt Sarah slide a note in front of her. Alice glanced down. It read, "Phase 1 complete." The courtroom, with its stifling air and smug faces, dissolved. Alice was, for a moment, 22 years old again, sitting not in a courtroom, but in her father's dusty, book-filled study on the Upper East Side. Her father, Arthur Bishop, was the quietest millionaire in New York. While men like Richard Davenport were splashed across the covers of magazines, Arthur was a man who wore faded sweaters and drank instant coffee. He was also the man who owned half of Midtown South. Arthur was not a builder. He was a buyer. He bought undesirable buildings in undesirable neighborhoods, and then he waited. He was a master of the long game. "People look at the skyline, Alice," he told her, tapping a thick stack of blueprints. "They see the glass and the steel, the big, shiny names. They never look at the deeds. They never look at the land under the building. Own the land. Own the deeds." Her art history degree wasn't a whim. Her father had insisted on it. "I can teach you numbers," he'd said. "I can't teach you to see what's beautiful, or what will be beautiful." Real estate isn't about numbers, Alice. It's about vision. It's about seeing a derelict 1920s factory and knowing that in 30 years, artists will pay a fortune to live there. He taught her how to read a zoning proposal, how to trace a building's lineage, how to spot structural flaws from 100 yards. And he taught her how to be invisible. "The best-run portfolio," he'd said, "is the one nobody knows you have. Use LLCs. Use trusts. Never put your name on anything directly. Let them think you're just a quiet art lover." When he passed away from a sudden heart attack, Alice was 25. She was devastated, and she was, quietly, one of the wealthiest women in the city. He left her his entire portfolio, valued at a conservative $80 million, locked inside a series of Byzantine trusts and holding companies. The flagship, the one her father started with his first tenement building, was a simple, unassuming LLC. AM Real Estate Holdings. Arthur Montgomery. Alice Montgomery. It was his last gift to her. A year later, she met Richard Davenport at a charity gala. He was electric. He was ambitious, handsome, and utterly charmed by her. He saw her old money name, Bishop, and her quiet, artistic demeanor, and he classified her. He saw her as the perfect wife asset. Beautiful, well-connected, and, he assumed, pliable. She never corrected him. During their 20-year marriage, while Richard was hunting and building Davenport Capital, Alice was doing her own work. From the library of their Park Avenue co-op, Alice, ostensibly managing the household budget, was managing her inheritance. She took her father's $80 million portfolio and began to grow it. She sold the tenements he'd held for 50 years, and, using her art history eye, bought 2 pre-war commercial buildings in the undesirable meatpacking district. Richard had laughed. "What are you doing, darling? Buying a slaughterhouse? Leave the investing to me." 10 years later, those buildings were leased to high-fashion brands and tech startups, and were worth 10 times what she paid. She diversified. She bought a percentage of a commercial tower in Chicago. She invested in a portfolio of medical office buildings in Texas. She did it all through AM Real Estate Holdings, managed by a small, discreet law firm her father had used. Her masterpiece, however, was 320 Park Avenue. Richard, in his arrogance, had decided Davenport Capital needed a flashier headquarters. He wanted a full-floor statement office. He'd complained to Alice over dinner. "My idiot finance team can't find anything with the right prestige, and the leases are criminal." Alice, sipping her wine, had said, "Oh, I heard a floor is opening up at 320 Park. It's a wonderful building. Classic mid-century lines." Richard had kissed her. "See? This is why I keep you. A head for beautiful things." He'd had his team secure the lease. He was so proud he brought the signature pages home to sign at his desk. Alice had watched him scrawl his name, Richard Davenport, CEO, on the dotted line. He never once looked at the name of the lessor. He just saw an LLC, one of 1,000 faceless property groups in the city. He didn't see that the check he signed every month for $4 million in rent was being deposited into a bank account controlled by his wife. She had used that income stream, his income stream, to make her next purchase. A building that had come up for a quiet sale. A building she knew well. The Manhattan Justice Tower. The city was selling the annex building that housed several family and civil courtrooms, leasing it back to maintain operations. It was a complex, bureaucratic deal that most private investors wouldn't touch. But Alice saw the ironclad tenant, the city of New York, and the long-term value. She bought it. She now owned the building her husband's lawyers leased their offices in. She owned the very courtroom where she was currently being humiliated. Richard thought he was divorcing a homemaker. He was, in fact, divorcing his landlady. The memory faded. Alice was back in courtroom 3B. The cold, quiet calm wasn't just a mood. It was power. It was the absolute, unshakable knowledge that she had already won. "The defense calls Mr. Richard Davenport back to the stand," Sarah Jenkins announced, her voice cutting through the post-lunch lull. Richard looked surprised, as did Thorne. They had assumed their part was done. Richard sauntered back to the box, a look of bored indulgence on his face, as if humoring a child. "Mr. Davenport," Sarah began, "you stated this morning that your company, Davenport Capital, is valued at approximately $500 million. Is that correct?" "Give or take," Richard said, waving a hand. "Markets fluctuate. And this valuation is based on your assets under management, your proprietary trading algorithms, and your market position?" "Yes. It's a complex valuation, but that's the gist. I'm more interested in your liabilities, Mr. Davenport. Your expenses." Sarah held up a document, a profit and loss statement from Davenport Capital's last fiscal year, acquired during discovery. "I see here a significant annual operating expense. Lease and occupancy costs, totaling $48 million per year. Is that correct?" Richard shifted. "We lease prime Reala estate. It's the cost of doing business. 320 Park Avenue isn't cheap." "No," Sarah agreed, her voice smooth as silk. "It certainly is not. $48 million, that's a significant drain on your profits, isn't it?" Thorne stood up. Objection. "Relevance? Is Miss Jenkins going to be Mr. Davenport's new CFO? What does his office rent have to do with this divorce?" "It has everything to do with it, Your Honor," Sarah said, turning to the judge. "It speaks directly to the financial acumen Mr. Thorne himself mocked. It also speaks to a gross misrepresentation of the marital asset pool." Judge Reed leaned forward, intrigued. "I'll allow it. But make your point, Ms. Jenkins." "Thank you, Mr. Davenport. This $48 million annual lease at 320 Park Avenue, to whom is that paid?" Richard scoffed. "I don't know. I don't sign the rent checks. My finance department handles that. It's some property group, AMH. APR, something like that. It's irrelevant. It's not irrelevant, Mr. Davenport. The lessor of record for the 45th floor of 320 Park Avenue is an entity called AM Real Estate Holdings, LLC, is it not? Richard squinted, as if trying to recall the name. Yes, that sounds right. So what? So what? Sarah repeated. She walked back to her table and picked up a thick binder. Mr. Davenport, you testified that your wife's passions were art and charity, that she wasn't interested in business. That's correct, Richard said, his confidence unwavering, that she wouldn't know the difference between a hedge fund and a garden hedge. Also correct, Richard smirked. Then can you explain this? Sarah placed a document on the projector. It was the Articles of Incorporation for AM Real Estate Holdings, LLC. The name and signature of the sole member, the sole proprietor, were clear as day. Alice Montgomery. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. Marcus Thorne's head snapped toward the screen. His face, usually a mask of smug control, went utterly blank with shock. Richard just stared. His brain seemed to be short-circuiting, unable to process the data. What? What is this? Richard stammered, his mask of charm cracking. This is some kind of joke. A forgery. It is a certified copy from the New York Secretary of State, Sarah said, her voice ringing with newfound power. Filed 20 years ago. AM Real Estate Holdings, LLC. As in Alice Montgomery. It is, and always has been, her company. She turned to face Richard, her expression one of cold fury. You testified you didn't know who you paid rent to. For 20 years, Mr. Davenport, every single month, you have been paying rent to your wife. You have been funding her business empire while claiming she was incapable of understanding yours. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Chloe Vance, in the gallery, had her hands over her mouth. Richard's face, usually tanned and healthy, was draining of all color. He was looking at Alice, really looking at her, for the first time in their marriage. He wasn't seeing his decorative wife. He was seeing a stranger. But that's marital property, Thorne finally sputtered, leaping to his feet. It doesn't matter. If she ran this company during the marriage, the assets are 50-50. All she's done is prove she's a liar. Oh, I wouldn't use that word, Mr. Thorne, Sarah said, a dangerous glint in her eye. Because my client hasn't been lying. She's just been silent, and this company is not marital property. She produced another set of documents. This is the last will and testament of Arthur Bishop, dated 2 years before the marriage. It details the transfer of his entire real estate portfolio into a pre-existing trust, which in turn funded AM Real Estate Holdings. It is a premarital, inherited asset. All appreciation, all profits have been meticulously kept separate. It is not part of the marital pot. It is, and always has been, hers and hers alone. Thorne looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. So, Sarah summarized, turning to the judge, not only does my client have financial acumen, it appears her portfolio, which Mr. Davenport has been paying into, is significantly more stable and valuable than his own leverage to the hilt empire. The $5 million he offered her. That's what she earns from him in just over a month. The courtroom was in chaos. Judge Reed hammered her gavel. Order! Order in this court! Marcus Thorne was in a frantic, whispered huddle with Richard, who looked physically ill. His face was ashen, his arrogance shattered. He kept glancing at Alice, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and a new, dawning horror. Your Honor, Thorne tried, his voice strained. This is an ambush. We have not had time to review these alleged documents. They were all provided in discovery, Mr. Thorne, Sarah said coolly. You just didn't look. You saw AM Real Estate, and like Mr. Davenport, you dismissed it as irrelevant. You assumed, just as he did, that the woman sitting opposite you was a simpleton. You didn't do your due diligence. This was the deepest cut. For a lawyer of Thorne's stature, being accused of sloppy work was worse than being called a criminal. His face purpled with rage. Judge, he stammered, this is still irrelevant to the divorce. So she has her own money. Fine. That just makes our client's offer of $5 million more generous. She clearly doesn't need it. We retract the offer. Let her keep her buildings. We'll keep Davenport Capital. A clean break. He was trying to cut his losses, to get Richard out of the room before any more blood was spilled. I'm afraid it's not that simple, Mr. Thorne, Sarah said. She still had the floor. She wasn't done. You're right, she continued. My client does not want or need a single penny of Mr. Davenport's money. She has, as you've pointed out, her own. And she is more than happy to walk away from this marriage with only what she brought into it. Richard visibly relaxed. He saw an escape. He would be humiliated, yes, but he would be free. His company would be intact. However, Sarah added, we have a few housekeeping items to discuss, namely the lease at 320 Park Avenue. Richard froze. The current lease agreement for Davenport Capital, Sarah said, consulting her notes, expires in 60 days. Richard's blood ran cold. He knew, every CEO in New York knew, that finding and building out a new full-floor office in Midtown took at least a year. And given Mr. Davenport's personal and professional conduct, Sarah continued, his flagrant disrespect for the owner of the building, and his, frankly, slanderous testimony here today, AM Real Estate Holdings will not be renewing the lease. You have 60 days to vacate. You can't, Richard bellowed, forgetting he was in court. You can't. That will destroy my company. We have 400 employees, our servers, our trading infrastructure. It's impossible. It's not impossible, Alice spoke for the first time, her voice cutting through his panic. It was quiet, but it carried the weight of pure steel. It's just inconvenient. You'll have to find a new, beautiful building, Richard. This is retaliatory, Your Honor, Thorne roared. She's using this to extort him. We will sue. It is not retaliatory, Mr. Thorne. It is a business decision, Sarah countered. AM Real Estate has a fiduciary duty to its owner. Why would it continue to lease to a tenant who has publicly and maliciously maligned its sole proprietor? Mr. Davenport is a liability. Besides, we have a new tenant already lined up, a tech firm. They're paying 30% above what Mr. Davenport was paying. Richard was openly gasping. He was being evicted. By his ex-wife. He was going to be the laughingstock of Wall Street. And there's one more thing, Sarah said. A question I asked you earlier, Mr. Thorne. Thorne, who was still reeling from the eviction notice, looked at her blankly. What? I asked about your offices, the ones you're sitting in, the ones your firm, Sullivan and Cromwell, leases in this very building. Thorne's eyes widened. He slowly looked around the courtroom, at the mahogany panels, the brass fixtures, as if seeing them for the first time. He looked down at the floor, then up at the ceiling. A sickening, impossible thought began to form in his mind. Objection? He tried, but the word came out as a weak squeak. You objected as to relevance, Mr. Thorne. Do you remember? Sarah was enjoying this. Just a little. Let me show you just how relevant it is. She put a final document on the projector. It wasn't a lease. It was a deed of sale. The document showed that the Manhattan Justice Tower Annex, the building housing Courtroom 3B, and the offices of a dozen high-powered law firms had been sold 7 years prior to AM Real Estate Holdings, LLC, Sarah read aloud, her voice echoing in the stunned silence. She turned to face the lawyer's table. "My client, Mrs. Alice Montgomery, doesn't just own your client's building, Mr. Thorne." She pointed a finger at the floor. "She owns this one." The silence that followed Sarah's announcement was not just a lack of noise. It was a physical vacuum, heavy and suffocating. Marcus Thorne, a man who had verbally eviscerated hundreds of witnesses in this very room, stared at the deed on the projector screen. His mouth was slightly open. His brain was catching up to the reality that for the past 3 years, his firm's multi-million-dollar quarterly rent checks were being signed over to the quiet, beige woman he had just mocked for her art history degree. The gallery was frozen. The reporter who had snickered earlier looked like he had just seen the Holy Grail. Chloe Vance, Richard's fiancée, was pale, her mind clearly calculating her future, attached to a man who had just been so publicly, so apocalyptically castrated. Richard Davenport was catatonic. He was staring at Alice, his expression unreadable. It was the blank look of a man watching his entire life burn to the ground from a window he can't open. And then Alice spoke. She did not stand. She did not raise her voice. She simply turned in her chair to look directly at Marcus Thorne. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice placid, yet carrying to every corner of the room. "I'm a very hands-on landlord. I read all my tenant reports." Thorne said nothing. He couldn't. "Your firm, Sullivan & Cromwell," Alice continued, "is on a 20-year lease. A very favourable one, I might add. My father negotiated it. But there is a clause. Section 14, subsection B, the Morals Clause. It stipulates that the tenant must not engage in conduct that brings the building or its owner into disrepute." Thorne's blood turned to ice. He knew the clause. It was boilerplate, almost never enforced. "And I have to say," Alice went on, "that hearing one of my tenants, in my own building, publicly mocking and slandering me, well, I consider that disrepute, don't you?" Thorne was white as a sheet. Alice hadn't just won the divorce. She hadn't just evicted Richard. She was now threatening to evict his entire law firm. The professional and financial implications were staggering. He would be ruined, disbarred perhaps for such catastrophic malpractice. He finally, slowly, sank into his chair. He put his head in his hands. He was a broken man. It was Judge Evelyn Reed who finally spoke, her voice awestruck. "Miss Jenkins, Mrs. Montgomery. In 25 years on this bench, I have never seen anything like this." She cleared her throat, regaining her judicial composure, but a small, almost imperceptible smile played on her lips. "This court will take a 30-minute recess. Mr. Thorne, I suggest you and your client use that time productively." The gavel cracked, and the judge swept from the room. The moment she was gone, the room erupted. But it wasn't noise. It was a frantic, terrified scramble. Richard grabbed Thorne by the arm of his suit. You fix this! What did I pay you for? Fix it!" "Fix it!" Thorne hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. "She owns the building, Richard. She owns the land. There's nothing to fix. We've been playing checkers while she was playing 3D chess for 20 years. Offer her money. Give her what she wants," Richard pleaded, his facade of the Titan gone, replaced by a desperate, sweating child. "What can you offer a woman who owns you?" Thorne spat back. He straightened his tie, smoothed his hair, and walked on trembling legs over to Alice and Sarah's table. Alice was calmly sipping her water. "Mrs. Montgomery," Thorne began, his voice hoarse. He was no longer the shark. He was the chum. "Alice." "What? What do you want?" Alice looked up at him, her eyes as clear and cold as a winter sky. "What I've always wanted, Mr. Thorne," she said, "to be left alone, and to be paid on time." She paused, then added, "Oh, and Richard's new offer. The clean break. We're rejecting that too." Richard, who had stumbled over, paled. "What? Why? You have everything." "You're right, I do," Alice said. "But you see, when I was managing my little household budgets, I was also managing the family's joint accounts, the ones you never looked at. And I noticed you've been borrowing." She signaled to Sarah, who produced a final, thin file. "You've been pulling money from the children's trust funds, Richard," Alice said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You've been using their inheritance as collateral for your bad trades. You took $30 million. You thought I wouldn't notice. You thought the art history major couldn't count. This was the final, fatal blow. Stealing from his own children." "I'm not asking for a single dollar of your money," Alice said. "I am, however, taking back my children's money. And I'm taking your 50% share of the Hamptons estate to cover the interest you owe them. I'm also filing for sole custody. I don't think a judge will have a problem with it, given this new evidence of your character." Richard Davenport finally, completely, collapsed. He sagged against the table, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had lost his wife, his office, his dignity, his Hamptons home, and now his children. He was a king with no kingdom, no castle, and no heir. He had been laughed into the courtroom as a lion. He would be crawling out as an insect. When Judge Reed returned to the bench, the scene was transformed. Marcus Thorne was standing, but he looked like a man who had aged a decade. Richard Davenport was in his chair, but his spine was gone. He was a husk. "Well, Mr. Thorne," the judge asked, "have you had a productive conversation?" Thorne swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Yes, Your Honor. My client, Mr. Davenport, retracts all previous offers and testimony. We accept all of Mrs. Montgomery's terms, as stated." Judge Reed looked at the papers Sarah Jenkins had filed during the recess. "All terms? Including the transfer of the Hamptons' property in lieu of the $30 million returned to the Children's Trust, and sole custody?" "Yes, Your Honor," Thorne whispered. "And Mr. Davenport waives any and all claims to any business or property held by Mrs. Montgomery, including but not limited to AM Real Estate Holdings, LLC?" "Yes, Your Honor." The judge signed the papers with a flourish. "Then this divorce is finalized. The marriage between Alice Montgomery and Richard Davenport is dissolved, per the terms filed here today." She struck the gavel. "We are adjourned." It was over. Alice stood up. She smoothed her simple beige suit. Sarah Jenkins smiled at her, a real dazzling smile of triumph. "How do you feel?" Sarah asked. "I feel quiet," Alice said. It was true. The noise in her head, the constant, grinding noise of being underestimated, of being dismissed, was finally gone. She picked up her purse and began to walk out of the courtroom. Marcus Thorne watched her go, a look of pure, unadulterated terror on his face. She was, quite literally, his landlady. His career was in her hands. Richard Davenport didn't move. He just stared at the mahogany grain of the table in front of him. Alice walked down the center aisle. She passed Chloe Vance, who was crying silently, her massive diamond ring looking suddenly gaudy and cheap. Alice paused for just a second. She looked at the young woman. "A word of advice," Alice said, her voice not unkind. "Read what you sign, and never let anyone make you feel small." Chloe looked up at her, stunned. Alice continued her walk. She pushed open the heavy courtroom doors. The hallway was already buzzing. The reporter was on his phone, speaking frantically. "You're not going to believe this. The wife?" "No, the wife. She owns the building. Yes, the whole damn building." The story of the art history major, who had been laughed out of the courtroom, would be on the front page of the Post by morning. It would be the talk of Wall Street by lunch. Richard Davenport's reputation was not just damaged, it was annihilated. Alice Montgomery walked out of the Manhattan Justice Tower, the building she owned, into the bright New York afternoon. She didn't look back. She had a portfolio to manage. The heavy doors of Courtroom 3B swung shut behind Alice Montgomery, leaving a vacuum in her wake. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound was the frantic ticking of the wall clock, each click an agonizing reminder of the time bomb that had just detonated. Richard Davenport remained a statue of ash. He stared at the spot where Alice had sat, his mind replaying the last hour in a fractured, nightmarish loop. She owns the building. She owns this. It was Marcus Thorne who moved first. He tore his gaze from the door and looked at his client. The professional mask was gone, replaced by a raw, primal panic. "Richard," he hissed, his voice a dry rasp. "What have you done?" Richard didn't respond. He was still in freefall. "Richard!" Thorne grabbed his arm, shaking him. "She can't be serious. The morals clause? Evicting the firm?" "She wouldn't. It's billions in jeopardy. Mine. Yours." The sound of a throat clearing cut through Thorne's panic. They both looked up. Chloe Vance stood by the gallery rail, her champagne-colored hair slightly mussed. Her face was pale, and her blue eyes, usually so adoring, were now sharp and cold as ice chips. "Richard?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Chloe, thank God," Richard stammered, making a move toward her. "You see what she did? That bitch." "You stole from your children," Chloe stated. It wasn't a question. Richard flinched as if struck. It was a loan, a temporary measure. I was going to pay it back." "You used their trust funds as collateral," Chloe continued, her voice devoid of emotion. "And you lost it." It was a barred trade. The market. You lost your company's lease. You lost your home. You lost your custody. You lost, Richard." She looked at him, no longer seeing a lion, but a mangy, pathetic hyena. The man she'd attached herself to, the man who promised her a life of endless luxury, was a fraud. He was, in a word, poor. "Chloe, baby, we can fix this," he pleaded, reaching for her hand. She pulled it back. With a calm, deliberate motion, she twisted the 12-carat diamond ring from her finger. The diamond that had been the subject of so much gossip, the symbol of her victory. It suddenly looked like a shackle. "I can't be tied to this, Richard," she said. She didn't throw the ring. She simply placed it on the defense table, next to Thorne's now useless legal pad. "I can't be tied to a man who steals from his own children." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking an angry, final rhythm on the marble floor. She didn't run. She retreated, a soldier pulling back from a hopelessly lost battle. "Chloe! Chloe!" Richard roared, lunging after her. "Let her go, you fool!" Thorne snarled, yanking him back. "She's the least of your problems." As if summoned, a new figure appeared. The reporter, Jake, who had been scribbling frantically, stepped in front of them, his phone recording. "Mr. Davenport, is it true? Does your ex-wife own 320 Park? Are you being evicted? Mr. Thorne, is it true your firm is a tenant of Mrs. Montgomery's? What about the morals clause?" Richard, blinded by a humiliation so total it had become rage, lunged. He grabbed the reporter by the shirt. "Get out of my face! Get out!" A bailiff was on him in a second, pulling him off. "That's enough, Mr. Davenport. You're out." "No comment," Thorne yelled, trying to shield Richard as he half-dragged, half-shoved his client out a side door, escaping into a service hallway, a king fleeing through the servants' quarters. The last thing they heard was Jake's voice. already on the phone with his editor. "It's all true. Get me the front page. I'm calling it The Landlady's Revenge. This is going to break the internet." Meanwhile, Alice and Sarah Jenkins settled into the back of a black Mercedes S-Class. It was not a flashy car. Like Alice, it was a statement of quiet, unassailable quality. Sarah, usually so composed, was practically vibrating. Alice, that was biblical. The look on Thorne's face when I mentioned the morals clause. I thought he was going to have a stroke. Alice was looking out the window as the Manhattan Justice Tower, her tower, receded. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a profound, crystalline quiet. The knot of tension she had carried in her stomach for 20 years, the constant, low-grade hum of being dismissed, was gone. "He's a sloppy lawyer, Sarah," Alice said, her voice calm. "He mistook arrogance for intelligence. They both did." "So," Sarah said, leaning back. "What now? A bottle of Dom Perignon? A trip to Paris? You just won the most spectacular divorce in New York history. You're a free woman. And you're, well, richer than God." Alice turned from the window. A small, genuine smile touched her lips, the first Sarah had seen. "What now?" Alice said. "His work." She picked up her phone. The screen was a solid, cascading waterfall of missed calls and texts from numbers she didn't recognize. She ignored them all and dialed a number from memory. "Michael, it's Alice," she said. "Yes, it's done. No, I'm fine, thank you. Listen, I need you to schedule an emergency board meeting for AM Real Estate tomorrow at 9 a.m. Yes, that meeting. It's time to restructure. We've been a silent holding company for long enough. I'm taking an active C-suite role. I want to see the proposals for the new Hudson Yards development by end of day. And Michael? Liquidate the shares we hold in Davenport Capital. I don't care what the price is. Sell it all. It's a toxic asset." She hung up and immediately dialed another number. "Headmaster Williams, please." "Yes, this is Alice Montgomery. I'm calling to inform you that I'll be picking up James and Sophia from school today." "Yes, myself. And from this day forward, all academic and medical correspondence is to come only to my email. My ex-husband's access to their school records is to be revoked, per this court order. I'll have my lawyer send it over immediately." She finished the call and took a deep breath. Sarah was watching her, impressed. Alice wasn't just a victor. She was an executive. "You've been planning this," Sarah said. "Not just the divorce, all of it, the restructuring. You don't buy a building, Sarah, just to own it," Alice said, echoing her father's words. "You buy it to build on it. Richard was a liability. I've just divested. Now, let's go get my children." That evening, Alice sat in her father's study. It was her study now, the only room in the massive Park Avenue co-op that Richard had never entered, dismissing it as drafty and full of old books. The children were asleep. She had told them simply that the divorce was final and they would be living with her. The relief on their faces, particularly 16-year-old Sophia's, told Alice she had done the right thing. At 9:15 p.m., her private line rang. She let it ring 3 times before answering. "Hello?" "Mrs. Montgomery." The voice on the other end was shattered. The booming, condescending baritone of Marcus Thorne was gone, replaced by the dry, terrified rasp of a man whispering in a dark room. "Mr. Thorne," Alice replied, her voice neutral. Please," he stammered. "Mrs. Montgomery, Alice, I am calling to offer my profound, my total apology for my conduct in court. I was unprofessional. I was inexcusable." Alice said nothing. She let the silence stretch, forcing him to fill it. "My partners, "They've seen the news," he said, his voice cracking. "The morals clause. Alice, please, I have a family. I have a mortgage. I was just doing my job." "No, Mr. Thorne," Alice said, her voice dropping to ice. "You were not just doing your job. Your job was to represent your client. Your job was to read the discovery I provided. Your job was to protect his interests. You failed. Instead, you took pleasure in trying to humiliate me. You called me a dim-witted socialite in a building I own, while representing a firm that pays me rent. It wasn't just unprofessional, it was stupid. And I do not suffer stupid people in my business. You're right, I'm ruined," he wept. "Yes, you are," Alice agreed. "As of this afternoon, my counsel sent a formal letter to your firm's managing partners detailing your conduct and invoking Section 14, subsection B. Your partners have a choice. They can either terminate your employment, effective immediately, and issue a public apology for your conduct, or they can join you in litigation. I wonder which they'll choose." "So you're evicting us?" he gasped. "No," Alice said. "I am not vindictive, Mr. Thorne. I am a businesswoman. You are a bad asset, so I'm having you removed. The firm, however, is a good tenant. They pay on time, but their lease is up for renewal in 8 months. You can tell your former partners that their renewal terms will be stiff, very stiff. A 50% increase to start." She was firing him, saving the firm, and turning a massive profit all in one move. "Thank you, Mrs. Montgomery. Thank you," he sobbed. "Don't thank me," Alice said. "Thank my father. He's the one who taught me that a good landlord always takes out the trash." She hung up the phone. The next morning, the New York Post cover was even more brutal than Jake had promised. "She owns the block," with a split photo of a smug Richard from last year and a terrified Richard fleeing the courthouse. The Wall Street Journal was quieter but more devastating. Davenport Capital faces collapse as CEO's hidden marital assets prove to be his landlord. Within 48 hours, Davenport Capital's lines of credit were pulled. Investors staged a full-blown revolt. The company filed for bankruptcy a week later. Richard Davenport was last seen, unshaven, yelling at Chloe outside her new apartment before being escorted away by security. Alice Montgomery, meanwhile, was not seen at all. Not at galas, not at parties. She was, however, spotted in a hard hat, walking the site of a new, gleaming glass tower in Hudson Yards. She was looking at the blueprints, her face focused and serene. She was no longer just the bishop's heiress or the quiet landlady. She was a builder, and she was just getting started. And that's the story of how Alice Montgomery taught a courtroom full of arrogant men the most important lesson in business. Never, ever underestimate the person who signs your checks. They thought she was a decorative wife, a quiet fool with an art degree. They didn't realize that while they were building an empire of ego, she was building one of steel and stone. The loudest person in the room is rarely the most powerful. Sometimes the real power is the person who owns the room itself. What did you think of Alice's ultimate revenge? Was it karma, or was it just brilliant business? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice and hidden strength, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for more dramatic real-life stories every week.
They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But for Alara Vance, it wasn't about revenge. It was about survival. When her husband of 10 years, Marcus, threw her out with nothing but a used suitcase and a 10-year-old car, he told her she was nothing. He said she'd be begging at his door within a month. He was wrong. The next time Marcus saw his ex-wife, she wasn't begging. She was stepping off a $70 million Gulfstream G700, standing beside a man who could buy and sell his entire world on a whim. This is the story of how she went from divorced and destitute to dominant. The silence in the penthouse was loud. It was a cold, sterile silence, the kind that only exists in spaces designed by minimalist architects and inhabited by emotionally bankrupt people. Alara Vance, soon to be just Alara, stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows watching the San Francisco fog swallow the Golden Gate Bridge. It felt symbolic. "So that's it," she said, her voice a dry rasp. She didn't turn around. Marcus Reed, her husband of a decade, sighed. It was a sound of pure exasperation, the kind one makes when a business deal is taking too long to close. He was standing by the bar adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke Brioni suit. "Alara, don't be dramatic. It's just a signature." "Just a signature," she repeated the words tasting like ash. 10 years of my life, my career, well, everything. All for just a signature. "I provided you with a very comfortable life." Marcus snapped, his polished veneer cracking. "You wanted for nothing. That art history degree from Brown was useless, and you know it. I gave you a purpose. I gave you this." He gestured to the multi-million-dollar view, the custom Italian furniture, the life he had built, while she... What had she done? Planned his dinners, hosted his clients, picked out his ties. She had done all that and more. She had been his sounding board, his unpaid therapist, his social strategist, and his buffer against the world. She had given up a promising curator position at a Boston gallery to follow him to California for his big break at a venture capital firm, a break that she now realized she had helped engineer. "And now you're giving it to Chloe," Alara said. It wasn't a question. Marcus froze. He hadn't thought she knew the name. He'd been sloppy, leaving a hotel receipt from the St. Regis in his travel bag. Chloe, 24 years old, an influencer, with plastic curves and a vacant smile. "She has nothing to do with this," he lied poorly. "She has everything to do with this," Alara said, finally turning. Her eyes, usually a warm hazel, were like polished stones. "You're trading me in for a newer model, Marcus. It's the most cliché thing you've ever done. But the one thing you didn't count on is this: I will sign your papers." She walked over to the glass desk. The divorce settlement lay there, a thick, insulting stack of paper. His lawyers had been brutal. The prenuptial agreement, which she'd signed in good faith, was ironclad. She would get her car, a 2014 Honda Civic, her personal effects, and a one-time transitional payment of $25,000. In Pacific Heights, that was barely 3 months' rent. "You're making a mistake, Alara," he said, and for a second she heard a flicker of fear. Not of losing her, but of the inconvenience. "You'll be back. You're not cut out for the real world." "That's the difference between you and me, Marcus. You think this," she motioned to the penthouse, "is the real world. I think it's a cage. A very beautiful, very empty cage." She picked up the expensive gold-plated pen. She didn't just sign her name. She slashed it across the dotted line. Alara Vance. She left the pen on the desk, walked into the massive bedroom, and grabbed the one suitcase she had pre-packed. It contained 3 pairs of jeans, a few sweaters, her running shoes, and a faded copy of The Odyssey. As she walked to the private elevator, Marcus blocked her path. "What about your art, your books, your clothes?" "Keep them," she said, her voice hollow. "Or give them to Chloe. I'm sure she'd love to play dress-up in my life." He flinched. "Alara, wait. The $25,000. I'll have my bank wire it." "Don't bother," she said, cutting him off. "I don't want your guilt money." "Then you'll have nothing," he yelled, his face turning an ugly shade of red. "I have my name," she said, pressing the elevator button. "And starting today, that's more than you have." The polished brass doors slid shut, reflecting Marcus's stunned, furious face. Alara walked through the marble lobby, ignoring the concierge's polite nod. She got into her scuffed-up Honda, the engine turning over with a reluctant cough. She didn't know where she was going. She just drove. She crossed the Golden Gate Bridge, the fog so thick it was like driving through a cloud. She drove until the sun came up, and then she drove some more, the check engine light, a tiny angry orange eye on her dashboard. She drove north away from the life she knew with $400 in her checking account and a past that was burning her to the ground. Alara drove for 2 days, fueled by stale gas station coffee and a searing, hollow rage. She ended up in Napa Valley, not in the glamorous tourist trap parts, but in the gritty, working-class back-end town of St. Helena. Her car finally gave out, the transmission dying with a metallic shriek right in front of a small greasy spoon diner called the Napa Nook. It was a sign, a miserable, pathetic sign. She sold the car to a scrapyard for $500. With just under $1,000 to her name, she found a room for rent above a bakery, a tiny, slanted-roof attic space that smelled perpetually of yeast and stale sugar. It cost $600 a month cash. She was left with almost nothing. The real world, as Marcus called it, was cold and sharp. On her 3rd day, she walked into the Napa Nook. It was the opposite of the fine dining establishments she used to frequent. The vinyl on the booths was cracked, and the air was thick with the smell of frying bacon and burnt coffee. A woman with a pencil-thin face and a name tag that read Mavis looked her up and down. "We're not hiring for the front." "Pardon?" Alara asked, her voice still holding a trace of its former polished life. "Your hands," Mavis said, pointing with her pen. "Soft, manicured. You've never worked a day in your life. I need a dishwasher. Can you handle that, or did you come in here to ask for directions to the Auberge du Soleil?" Alara looked at her own hands. Marcus had always complimented them, said they were an aristocrat's hands. She curled them into fists. "I can wash dishes." Mavis stared at her for a long, uncomfortable moment. "Fine, $14 an hour. You start now. Name's Laura." "It's Alara." "It's Laura now." Mavis cut her off. "We've already got an Elena. Causes confusion. The aprons are in the back." For the next 4 weeks, Laura lived in a steaming hell. She scrubbed burnt egg off plates until her aristocrat's hands were raw red and cracked. Her back ached. Her feet throbbed. She learned to move fast to stay out of the way of the line cooks and to ignore the condescending smirks from the career waitresses. She learned humility in a way she never had before. She was invisible. She was no one. And in a strange way, it was liberating. No one here cared who her husband was, what she was wearing, or what useless degree she held. They just cared if she was fast enough. One evening, after a brutal 12-hour double shift, she was sitting in the alley behind the diner, soaking her feet in a bucket of ice water. "Tough one, huh?" Alara looked up. It was Sarah, one of the younger waitresses, smoking a cigarette. Sarah had sharp, intelligent eyes and a tattoo of a hummingbird on her wrist. "You could say that," Alara sighed, wincing as she moved her blistered heel. Sarah took a long drag and exhaled. "Mavis is a dragon, but she's fair. You're still here. Most of the pretty ones quit after a day." "I'm not pretty," Alara said, the words coming out before she could stop them. "Not anymore." "Honey," Sarah said, crouching down. "That's just grime. It washes off. You're different. You talk like one of them from the tasting rooms up on the hill. What's your story?" Alara was about to give the canned fresh start speech, but something in Sarah's no-nonsense gaze made her stop. "My husband left me. Took everything." Sarah nodded, not with pity but with recognition. "Welcome to the club. My ex took my car and my credit. At least you're just washing dishes. I'm washing and serving. The tips are terrible this time of year." She put out her cigarette. "Listen, I'm working a side gig tonight. A catering event up at one of the big estates. It's $25 an hour under the table. They need extra servers. You look like you can hold a tray." "You in." Ilara's entire being screamed no. The thought of putting on a uniform of serving people like Marcus and his friends was nauseating. "I don't know. It's $25 an hour, Lara. Sarah said, her voice firm. "That's almost 2 of Mavis's hours. You're renting that attic from Paolo, right? He's a sweet old guy, but he'll kick you to the curb if you're a day late. You need the money." She was right. Ilara needed the money. "Okay," Ilara said, her voice stronger. "I'm in." "Good. Be at the corner of Main and Charter at 5 p.m. Wear all black. And for God's sake, file down those broken nails. You look like you've been clawing your way out of a grave." "Feels like it," Ilara muttered as Sarah walked away. "You'll be fine," Sarah called over her shoulder. "Just smile, don't talk, and whatever you do, don't spill anything on the guests, especially not at the Thorne estate." Ilara's blood ran cold. The Thorne estate. She knew that name. Anyone with an art history degree knew that name. Julian Thorne, the reclusive, eccentric billionaire art collector. He was a myth, a ghost who owned more private art than some small countries. She was going from scrubbing eggs at the Napa Nook to serving champagne in one of the most important private art collections in the world. The Thorne estate wasn't just a house, it was a compound. Perched high on a hill, it was invisible from the main road, hidden by a dense forest of ancient oaks and imported Italian cypress trees. The catering van passed through 3 separate security checkpoints before winding its way up a long gravel drive. Ilara, dressed in a stiff, poorly fitting black shirt and trousers, felt her old life rush back to her. This was the world she used to inhabit, albeit as a guest, not as the help. "Okay, newbies," the catering manager, a stressed-out man named Damien, barked as the van stopped. "Listen up. You don't look at the guests. You don't speak to the guests. You definitely do not speak to Mr. Thorne. He doesn't like people. Your job is to be invisible. A hand that appears with a drink, a hand that takes an empty glass. Got it. You are wallpaper." "Yes, chef," the group murmured. They were bustled through a massive industrial-sized kitchen and given their assignments. Ilara and Sarah were tasked with passing champagne and hors d'oeuvres. "Just follow my lead," Sarah whispered, grabbing a silver tray. "And try not to look terrified. They can smell fear." Ilara stepped out into the main gallery, and her breath caught. It wasn't a room, it was a museum. The walls were lined with art that shouldn't be here, art she had only ever seen in textbooks. A small, moody Turner. A stark, emotional Rothko. And there, over the massive limestone fireplace, was a painting that made her heart stop. "My God," she whispered. "What?" Sarah hissed, nudging her. "Tray up." "That's—" Ilara couldn't look away. "That's the girl with the amber locket. It's a Vermeer. It's been missing since 1945. Stolen from a private collection in Poland." Sarah's eyes went wide. "Lara, shut up. You're going to get us fired. It's just a painting. Pass the tiny quiches." Ilara forced herself to move, but her mind was racing. The Vermeer was real. She could tell from 20 feet away. The way the light hit the subject's face, the signature use of ultramarine. It was legitimate. Julian Thorne didn't just collect art. He possessed history. For 2 hours, Ilara was the perfect wallpaper. She glided through the minimalist rooms, offering champagne with a polite, vacant smile. The guests were the same people she had known in San Francisco, just with more money. Tech barons, old money heirs, and venture capitalists. They all had the same predatory brightness in their eyes. She saw Julian Thorne only once. He was not what she expected. He wasn't a young, slick CEO. He was an older man, perhaps in his late 60s, with a shock of white hair and the most intelligent, piercing blue eyes she had ever seen. He was dressed simply in a dark cashmere sweater and trousers, and he looked utterly bored by his own party. He was standing alone, staring at the Vermeer, when a group of men in sharp suits cornered him. Ilara drifted closer, her tray held high, pretending to offer drinks to a nearby couple. "And that's why the Devlamink is a guaranteed investment, Julian," one of the men, a slick art dealer named Antoine, was saying. "It's a pivotal piece from his Fauvist period, and at $50 million it's a steal. The provenance is flawless." "Flawless." Julian Thorne repeated, his voice a low gravel. You said the same thing about the Picasso you tried to sell me last year, Antoine. The one my own experts later found was a brilliant forgery from the 70s. A misunderstanding, Julian, I assure you, Antoine said, sweating slightly. This piece. This is different. It's authenticated by the highest authorities. The men moved toward a smaller adjacent room which Alara hadn't noticed. It was a private viewing gallery. There on an easel under a single spotlight was a painting. It was a vibrant, chaotic landscape, all screaming reds and swirling blues. A Vlaminck. Alara's eyes narrowed. She had seen this piece before, or rather a photo of it. It had been in the catalog for her graduate thesis, Great Fakes, the Art of the Master Forger. Gentlemen, Antoine said, gesturing grandly, I present Le Pont de Chateau. The men murmured in appreciation. Julian Thorne just stared, his expression unreadable. Alara watched, her heart hammering. She was just wallpaper. She should walk away. But as she looked at the painting, her art historian's brain took over. It was good. It was very good. But it was wrong. The signature was just a little too clean. The canvas visible at the edge had a synthetic tightness that wasn't right for the period, and the use of cerulean blue in the sky. Vlaminck was known for hating that pigment. He called it a paint for bankers' wives. Antoine was pulling out a contract. If you'll just sign, Julian, we can have it transported to your vault in Geneva by morning. Julian Thorne reached for the pen. Don't. The word was out of her mouth before she could stop it. It was quiet, but it cut through the room like a knife. Everyone froze. Antoine turned, his face a mask of fury. Who the hell are you? Damien, the catering manager, was already rushing over, his face pale. I am so sorry, Mr. Thorne. So sorry. She's new. I asked her a question. Julian Thorne said, his voice quiet but stopping Damien in his tracks. He turned his piercing blue eyes on Alara. She was still holding her silver tray. You said, don't, he said. Why? Alara's hands were shaking so hard the champagne flutes were rattling. This was it. This was the end of her $25 an hour job. This was probably the end of her life in St. Helena. She put the tray down on a nearby table. She took a deep breath, and she walked up to the painting. Because it's a fake, Alara said. The silence that followed Alara's declaration was absolute. Antoine, the art dealer, was the first to break it with a laugh that was sharp and brittle. A fake, he sneered, looking at her black and white uniform. And what exactly are your qualifications, sweetheart? Did you take a Modern Art 101 class at the local community college? Damien, the catering manager, looked like he was about to have a heart attack. Mr. Thorne, please, I'll have her removed immediately. She's delusional. Wait. Julian Thorne's voice was calm, but it carried an authority that silenced everyone. He hadn't taken his eyes off Alara. She made an accusation. I want to hear the evidence. You, he said, pointing a long, elegant finger at her. Explain. Alara's heart was a drum against her ribs, but the moment she focused on the canvas, the fear melted away. This was her world. This was the one thing Marcus had never been able to touch, the one part of her that was still hers. Start with the pigment, she said, her voice clear and steady. She stepped closer to the painting, her old curator's instincts taking over. This painting is dated 1905. Vlaminck, at this point in his Fauvist period, was using a very specific raw palette directly from the tube. He famously detested pre-mixed, artificial colors. The sky here, she gestured, is saturated with cerulean blue. Vlaminck loathed cerulean. He wrote about it in a letter to Derain in 1906, calling it a weak and bourgeois color. Julian Thorne's eyebrows shot up. Antoine's face had gone from red to a sickly pale. Furthermore, Alara continued, her confidence growing, look at the brushwork on the bridge. She pointed. It's hesitant. Vlaminck was never hesitant. He was an anarchist. He attacked the canvas. This is the work of someone copying his style, not inhabiting it. They're trying to replicate the savage strokes, but they're doing it carefully. It's a contradiction. She wasn't finished. But the real giveaway, it's the canvas. Look at the weave. She gestured to the edge where the canvas was tacked. It's too perfect. It's a modern synthetic blend linen. In 1905, he would have been using a coarser, hand-stretched jute or hemp canvas, and it would have had visible imperfections. This was probably made in a factory in the last 20 years. She turned from the painting and faced Julian Thorne. This isn't Le Pont de Chateau. It's a very, very good try, but it's a forgery. A brilliant one, but a forgery nonetheless. You should have your own experts check the carbon dating on the paint pigments. I guarantee you'll find titanium white, which wasn't commercially available in this form until the 1920s. The room was completely still. Antoine was staring at Alara as if she had just grown a second head. Julian Thorne stared at the painting, then at Alara, then back at the painting. A slow, thin smile spread across his face. It was a genuinely amused, wolfish smile. "Antoine," he said, his voice dangerously soft, "you have 30 seconds to get off my property, and if my lawyers ever hear your name again, it will be in a courtroom." Julian, listen to me," Antoine sputtered. "Are you going to believe her?" "A waitress over me." "The waitress," Mr. Thorne said, "just saved me $50 million, and she did it without a financial stake in the outcome. You, on the other hand," and he gestured to two large stone-faced security guards who had appeared in the doorway. "Gentlemen, please escort Mr. Antoine to his car, and make sure he doesn't take any of the tiny quiches with him." Antoine was dragged out, protesting the entire time. The remaining guests in the room began to talk in hushed, excited whispers. The party was over. Alara stood there, suddenly aware of her uniform, of her chapped hands, of the fact that she had just torpedoed a $50 million deal. She began to back away, her job for the night clearly finished. "And where do you think you're going?" Thorne's voice stopped her. She turned. I'm sorry, Mr. Thorne. I should get back to the kitchen." "I don't think so," he said. He walked over to her. He was tall, and he smelled faintly of old books and expensive cologne. "I've had experts from the Getty, the Met, and the Louvre on my payroll. None of them have ever been as concise, as passionate, or as correct in such a short amount of time." He looked at her, truly saw her for the first time. He saw the intelligence behind the exhaustion in her eyes. "You," he said, "are wasted here. Who are you?" "My name is Alara Vance. I used to be—" "A wife, a socialite, a joke." "I used to be an art historian." "No," Julian Thorne said, a strange light in his eyes. "You are an art historian. You're just currently in between assignments." He pulled a simple, elegant business card from his pocket. "My personal assistant, Ms. Davies, will call the catering company and inform them that you are indisposed. You and I, Ms. Vance, have a great deal to discuss. Starting with that Vermeer." Alara looked at Sarah, who was hiding behind a potted palm, giving her a frantic thumbs up. Okay, Alara said. "Good," Thorne said, gesturing for her to follow him up a winding glass staircase. "First, let's get you a real drink, and then you're going to tell me everything you know about the art of forgery." As she followed him, she passed a massive gilded mirror. She caught her reflection. She was Laura, the dishwasher, in a baggy black uniform. But for the first time in almost a year, the woman staring back at her looked like Alara Vance. Alara didn't go back to the attic room above the bakery. She didn't go back to the Napa Nook. She spent the next 6 hours in Julian Thorne's private library, a 2-story rotunda filled with first-edition books, and she suspected more missing art. They drank a 1982 Chateau Margaux. They talked about art, about history, about the soulless, transactional nature of the modern art market. He was fascinated by her knowledge not just of the art, but of the history behind it, the provenance, the wars, the passions that drove artists to create. She told him her story. Not the long, self-pitying version, but the facts. The degree from Brown, the curator job she gave up, the divorce, the penthouse in Pacific Heights. the $25,000 she'd refused. Julian Thorne listened to steepled fingers of V in front of his face. He was a man who understood value, and he recognized with a collector's thrill that he had just stumbled upon something priceless. Marcus Reed, he mused, swirling the wine in his glass. I know the name. A small-time VC. Thinks he's a shark, but he's swimming in a goldfish bowl. He's a fool. He didn't just trade you in. He traded a masterpiece for a print. A very, very cheap print. He thought I was useless, Ilara said, the wine warming her. He said my degree was a wall decoration. Then he's an idiot, Thorne said simply. People like Antoine. They're parasites. They thrive on the ignorance of new money. They turn beauty into a commodity. They are, in short, my least favorite people in the world. He leaned forward, his blue eyes intense. I've been wanting to start a new project, Ms. Vance. A nonprofit. A foundation. Not one that just buys art, but one that protects it. A foundation dedicated to authenticating major works, to hunting down forgeries, and to using all my resources to repatriate art stolen by the Nazis and other regimes. He paused. I have the money. I have the power. But I don't have the time and I don't have the eye. I need someone to run it. Someone with unimpeachable knowledge, a passion for the truth, and a certain amount of righteous anger. He smiled. I need a director, a president. I need you. Ilara stared at him. Mr. Thorne, I'm a dishwasher. You were a dishwasher, he corrected. As of 2 hours ago, I'm offering you a new position. President of the Thorne Vance Foundation. We'll call it the Vance Foundation. It has a better ring to it. Your salary will be, let's say, 5 times what your husband made. You'll have an unlimited budget for research, travel, and acquisitions. You'll have my lawyers, my security, and my full support. Your only job is to be right, and to be ruthless. Ilara was speechless. It was insane. It was a dream. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Julian said, topping off her glass. Your first assignment will be to go through my entire collection and tell me what's fake. I suspect after Antoine I have a few more errors in judgment. Ilara looked at the fire, at the Vermeer on the wall, at the new life spinning out in front of her. The fear was gone. The humiliation was gone. All that was left was a sharp, clear-minded purpose. Yes, she said. Mr. Thorne, yes, I accept. Excellent. You'll start tomorrow. My assistant will arrange for a new everything. Clothes, a car, a place to live. I have a guest house on the property you can use. Thank you, Ilara said, the words feeling small. But if I'm going to run this foundation, I can't be kept. I'll find my own place, and I'll need to go back to my room to get my things. Julian Thorne nodded, his respect for her visibly growing. Of course. My driver will take you. But, Ilara... Yes. Don't take too long. We have a lot of fakes to find. Ilara left the estate at 4 a.m., not in a catering van, but in the back of a black Mercedes Maybach. She collected her small bag from the attic room, leaving a month's rent and a thank-you note for Paolo. She left a separate note for Sarah with $500 in cash and the simple message, "You were right. It was good money. Thank you. E.V." For the next 6 months, Ilara Vance disappeared. She wasn't Lara the dishwasher or Ilara the ex-wife. She was E. Vance director. She dove into the work with a ferocious, single-minded focus. She flew to Zurich, to London, to Florence. She dismantled Julian's collection, finding 2 more high-level forgeries and a stolen antiquity that she immediately arranged to have returned to the Greek government, causing a minor international incident that Julian found hilarious. She wasn't just his employee. She became his partner, his protégé. He taught her about business, about leverage, about how to wield power with the precision of a scalpel. She taught him about history, about beauty, about the soul of the things he owned. She changed. Her hands were still strong, but the grime was replaced by purpose. She cut her hair into a sharp, stylish bob. She traded her jeans for the sharp, elegant lines of designers like the Row and Loro Piana. She didn't look like Marcus's wife. She looked like her own woman. One afternoon, she was in Julian's office reviewing the plans for a new museum wing. "The San Francisco Art Gala is in 2 weeks," Julian said casually, not looking up from a document. "It's the biggest charity event of the year. All the sharks will be there." "I know," Alara said. "We're donating the authenticated Vlamink we just acquired to their auction." "Good. I want you to present it." "On stage, me?" "You are the director of the Vance Foundation," he said. "It's your job. Besides," he added, a glint in his eye, "I hear it's being held at the Fairmont. And your ex-husband's firm, Reed Capital, is a junior sponsor. I suspect he'll be there." Alara's fingers tightened on her pen. The Fairmont, the place where Marcus had proposed, the place where he'd held his first big client dinner. "I see," she said, her voice perfectly neutral. "We'll fly in that afternoon," Julian said. "The G700 is at your disposal. I'll be your +1. He finally looked up. "It's time, Alara. It's time for San Francisco to officially meet Ms. Vance." The Gulfstream G700 descended through the clouds over the San Francisco Bay, a silver needle stitching the sky. Alara sat in one of the plush cream-colored leather seats sipping a glass of water. She wasn't nervous. She was prepared. In 6 months, her entire world had shifted. She was no longer a victim. She was a general. The jet's cabin, quiet as a library and smelling of fresh flowers and rich leather, was a world away from the rattling Honda Civic she had driven out of this city. "Ready?" Julian Thorne asked from the seat opposite her. He was reading the Wall Street Journal, looking perfectly at ease. "I've handled rogue art dealers and repatriated a 12th century statue," Alara said with a small smile. "I think I can handle a party." "That's the spirit," he said, folding the paper. "Just remember, these people are all smoke and mirrors. You're the only one in that room who is truly, unequivocally real." They landed at SFO's private terminal far from the commercial chaos. A black, armored Rolls-Royce Cullinan waited for them on the tarmac. As Alara stepped out of the jet, the cool, foggy air of her old city hit her. It didn't feel like home. It felt like a battlefield. They were driven to the Fairmont Hotel not as guests, but as patrons. They were given the presidential suite, which was really just a staging area for Alara to get ready. A team of stylists hired by Julian was waiting. "Ms. Vance, a pleasure," a woman with a chic French accent said. "I have options." The options were a rack of haute couture gowns. Alara bypassed the safe black and the flashy red. Her eyes landed on a dress in a deep sapphire blue. It was an Oscar de la Renta, a stunning off-the-shoulder column of silk that was both elegant and armor-like. "That one," she said. When she was ready, she looked at herself in the full-length mirror. The woman looking back was a stranger. Her hair was swept up in an elegant chignon. Around her neck, on loan from Julian's private collection, was a necklace of antique diamonds that had once belonged to a Russian royal. She was breathtaking, but more than that, she looked powerful. "Well," Julian said, standing in the doorway dressed in a flawless tuxedo, "Vermeer would have wanted to paint you." "How do I look?" she asked. "You look," he said, offering his arm, "like you own the place." "Good," Alara said, taking his arm. "Because tonight I just might." The grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel was not merely a room. It was an arena. This was the beating heart of San Francisco's old and new money, a glittering shark tank where fortunes were made, alliances were broken, and reputations were forged or annihilated over canapes and cocktails. The air was a heavy perfume of legacy desperation and $1,000-a-bottle champagne. And tonight Marcus Reed felt he was its master. He stood near the double-arched entrance, a strategic position, holding a flute of champagne like a trophy. His bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo felt like a second skin, On his arm, his new fiancée Chloe was a splash of garish red in a sea of tasteful black and gold. Her dress was a herve léger so tight it looked vacuum-sealed, and she was already complaining about her feet. "Marcus, that's Harrison Grant," Chloe hissed in his ear, her voice a sharp-edged whisper. "He runs the biggest tech fund in the valley. Introduce me." "In a minute, darling," Marcus said, his smile wide and practiced. He'd just secured a laugh from a city supervisor. "Networking is a hunt, not a race. You have to let them come to you." He felt a surge of pure, uncut confidence. This was his city, his crowd. He had shed his past, the quiet, academic, boring wife, and had upgraded. Chloe was young, ambitious, and understood that life was a transaction. He was a king in his castle, and tonight the gala was his coronation as one of the city's new elite. He was in the middle of telling a joke to a rival VC when the energy in the ballroom shifted. It wasn't a sound. It was a change in pressure, a collective intake of breath. The high-pitched chatter near the grand staircase didn't just quiet down, it evaporated. "What is it?" Chloe asked, standing on her toes, craning her neck. The live quartet, which had been playing a breezy Vivaldi, faltered and went silent. The only sound was the clicking of heels on marble. The announcer at the door, a man with a voice trained to sound bored by billionaires, suddenly sounded neither. His voice boomed into the microphone, filled with a reverence that was so rare it was shocking. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer called, his voice cracking slightly with excitement, "please welcome Mr. Julian Thorne." A wave of whispers and gasps washed over the room. Julian Thorne. Here Thorne didn't attend events. He was the event. People physically turned, a sea of faces drawn to the top of the stairs. Marcus felt a thrill. Thorne. If he could just get 30 seconds. "And his guest?" The announcer added, his voice rising to a crescendo, as if he couldn't believe the name on his card. "Ms. Ilara Vance." The name hit Marcus Reed like a physical blow. It was as if the air had been sucked from his lungs. Vance. Ilara Vance. He turned, a stupid, fixed smile still on his face. And then the smile dissolved. The champagne flute, the one he held like a scepter, slipped from his nerveless fingers. It didn't just drop. It shattered on the marble floor, the sound a tiny, sharp explosion in the sudden, echoing silence. He heard the name. Ilara Vance. It couldn't be. But it was. She stood at the top of the staircase, her hand resting lightly on the arm of the Julian Thorne. It was Ilara. But it wasn't his Ilara. The woman he had discarded, the woman he had called a wall decoration, was gone. In her place stood a queen. She was wearing a gown of deep sapphire blue silk that seemed to drink the light. It fell off one shoulder, a perfect column of impossible elegance. Around her throat was not a simple string of pearls, but a waterfall of antique diamonds, a necklace he recognized instinctively as royal. It was the kind of jewelry that started wars. Her hair, which she used to wear in a simple, practical bun, was swept up in a chignon so perfect it could have been sculpted by a Greek master. But it wasn't the dress or the diamonds or the billionaire on her arm that held the room captive. It was her bearing. She didn't look nervous. She didn't look impressed. She looked inevitable. She descended the staircase with a slow, deliberate grace, her eyes scanning the room not as a guest, but as a surveyor, as if she were deciding which parts of it were worth her time. "Marcus!" Chloe's voice was a shrill, ugly thing breaking the spell. "Marcus, who is that?" "Wait. Vance, as in your ex-wife." The waitress." Marcus couldn't speak. His throat was full of ash. He was frozen, a shard of glass from his own broken flute resting on the toe of his $2,000 shoe. He wasn't seeing Ilara, his mousy academic wife. He was seeing Ms. Vance, a creature of terrifying power. He was seeing the woman he had thrown out with $25,000, and she was now wearing $25 million around her neck as if it were an afterthought. He had traded in a priceless, undiscovered masterpiece for a cheap, gaudy print, and the print was currently digging her acrylic nails into his arm. "My God!" Chloe whispered, her face pale with a mixture of envy and panic. She's with Julian Thorne. He's worth more than God. Why is she with him, Marcus? Why didn't you tell me she looked like that?" Ilara and Julian reached the bottom of the stairs. The most powerful people in the room, the tech barons, the old money heirs, the politicians, parted like the Red Sea. They surged toward Ilara, not Julian. She was the new sun, and they were all desperate planets seeking her orbit. Ilara smiled a polite, measured smile as the mayor of San Francisco bowed to kiss her hand. She was a vision of grace, laughing lightly at something Julian whispered in her ear. And then she saw him. Her eyes, those warm hazel eyes he used to get lost in, swept across the room. They passed over the fawning crowds over the bar, and then they landed on him. For 1 second their gazes locked. Marcus felt a desperate, insane flicker of hope. She sees me. She remembers. And then Ilara did the most brutal, devastating thing she could possibly have done. She gave him a small, polite nod. The kind of nod you give a valet who has brought your car. A nod of faint recognition and even fainter interest. Then her eyes dismissed him, sliding past him as if he were nothing more than a statue, and focused on the CEO of a major bank. That 1 second long dismissal was a public execution. He was nothing. He was less than nothing. He was a ghost. She looked right at us. Chloe hissed, her voice trembling with rage. She looked at us like we were nothing. Like we're the help. Marcus, do something. Don't you stand there looking like a fool. Go talk to her. People are starting to stare at us. Goaded, humiliated, and operating on pure blind panic. Marcus did the stupidest thing he could have done. He walked over. He pushed his way through the crowd, dragging a fuming Chloe behind him. He reached the small, powerful circle of light that surrounded Ilara. "Ilara," he said. His voice came out as a pathetic croak. He cleared his throat. "Ilara." She turned. The small, intimate circle, Julian Thorne, the mayor, the bank CEO, turned with her. A half-dozen of the most powerful eyes in California were now on him. Ilara's face was a mask of perfect, cool politeness. "Marcus, I'm surprised to see you here. I always found you preferred events with a lower barrier to entry." It was a scalpel disguised as a comment, a direct hit at his junior sponsor status. He flushed. I barely recognized you. You look incredible." "Thank you," she said, her voice as cool and smooth as the silk of her dress. "You look the same." The insult hung in the air, glittering as brightly as her diamonds. "This is," Marcus stammered, pulling Chloe forward. "This is my fiancée, Chloe. Chloe, this is Ilara." Chloe, trying to regain some footing, forced a saccharine smile. "So nice to finally meet you. Marcus has told me nothing about you." "I'm sure he has," Ilara said, her eyes giving Chloe a quick, appraising glance that took in the too-tight dress and the desperate eyes. "He was never one for appreciating history. He prefers new acquisitions. But one must always be so careful about the provenance." Before Marcus or Chloe could even process the multi-layered insult, Ilara turned and placed a hand on Julian's arm. "And this, of course, is Julian Thorne. Julian, this is Marcus Reed. He used to manage my affairs." The ultimate demotion. From husband to manager. Julian Thorne, who had been observing the interaction with the detached amusement of a lion watching mice play, didn't even look at Marcus. His gaze didn't grace him. He smiled down at Ilara. "Ilara, my dear," Julian said, his voice a rich baritone that cut through the chatter. "Mr. Ellison and Senator Davies are waiting by the Winter Garden. They're anxious to discuss the repatriation of the Syrian artifacts. We really shouldn't keep them waiting." "You're right, of course, Julian," Ilara said. She turned back to Marcus, her smile now just a polite memory. Excuse us, Marcus. Chloe. She used Chloe's name, proving she had registered her, considered her, and dismissed her in the same breath. It was illuminating, seeing you again. Do enjoy your evening. And with that, she and Julian Thorne turned and glided away. They didn't rush. They didn't look back. And the entire room's center of gravity, the mayor, the CEO, the power, the money, moved with them, leaving Marcus and Chloe standing in a cold, empty void. It was as if a light had been switched off. People were no longer looking at them. They were looking past them. She called me an acquisition, Chloe hissed, her face a blotchy red. And you just stood there. You let her... Chloe, be quiet. Marcus mumbled, his face pale. No, you told me she was nothing. You told me she was a sad little bookworm that, she pointed a shaking red-nailed finger, is not nothing, Marcus. You're a fool. She ripped her arm from his. I'm going to the powder room. But she didn't walk toward the restrooms. She walked toward the bar where the hedge fund manager Harrison Grant was standing. Later that evening, the gala's host took the stage. And now, to say a few words and present the centerpiece of our auction, please welcome the director of the newly formed and incredibly important Vance Foundation, Ms. Ilara Vance. Marcus, who had been trying to get another drink from a bartender who was pointedly ignoring him, froze. Director, the Vance Foundation. Ilara walked onto the stage. The spotlight hit her and the room fell into a reverent hush. She was not a guest. She was not a +1. She was the main event. Good evening, she said. Her voice was clear, strong, and confident. It filled the entire vast ballroom. My name is Ilara Vance. For too long, she continued, the art world has been a playground, not for patrons but for predators, people who value profit over truth, who see a signature but not the soul of the work. They trade in masterpieces as if they are mere commodities to be bought hidden or discarded when a newer, shinier model comes along. From the back of the room, Marcus felt every word as a physical blow. This wasn't a speech. It was his eulogy. The Vance Foundation is not a charity, Ilara declared, her voice ringing with passion. It is a correction. We are not here to buy. We are here to validate, to repatriate, to restore. We are here to find the truth, to protect it, and to return it to the world. We are here to remind everyone that true value is not in what you own, but in what you protect, and that some things are not for sale. The room exploded. It wasn't polite applause. It was a thunderous, sustained, standing ovation. Marcus stood alone in the shadows, a ghost at his own funeral. He watched the woman he had called nothing command a room he had spent his entire life trying to enter. He saw Chloe across the room laughing and slipping her phone number to Harrison Grant. He was ruined. He hadn't just made a mistake. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had committed an act of self-annihilation. He had thrown away a masterpiece and he was left with the fakes. And the woman he had driven out of the city in a 10-year-old Honda had just returned and taken the entire city from him. Ilara Vance never looked back. Her return wasn't for revenge. It was a byproduct of her own incredible rise. She didn't come back to show Marcus what he had lost. She came back to show the world what she had found herself. Marcus, as it turned out, was audited 6 months later. His new fiancée had been a corporate spy for a rival firm. He lost his job, his reputation, and his penthouse. Ilara's story teaches us that our worth is never ever determined by who we leave or who leaves us. It's determined by what we build in the rubble. She drove away from her old life in a broken-down car, but she returned having built a brand new one, all on her own terms. What did you think of Ilara's incredible transformation? Have you ever had a moment where you had to completely rebuild your life from scratch? Let us know your story in the comments below. If you love this story of justice and empowerment, please don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own power. And for more dramatic stories every week, Make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss what we have coming next.